All right. So before we go into your first session, there's still a few tasks that you need to do before you step foot in your first session. The first part is reviewing your client info sheet. The reason why it's so important for you to review this prior to your first session is that you know what you're going into. You're not going in blindly. You're understanding in the client info sheet that what the child's preferred items are, what the child's problem behaviors are, as well as what proactive and reactive strategies that are included in the behavioral plan. And lastly, the session structure. So all these information is very key to knowing about your client prior to your first session. Before you look into your client info sheet, you can also locate this on Catalyst, or your supervisor will be sending it over to you a week to 2 weeks before your first session. Secondly, you'll be holding a what we call admin team meeting to go over the behavioral plan with your supervisor. And it's a good time for you to ask any questions that you may have. You might even role play and run a few practice with their supervisor. Thirdly, you'll go over the current goals that you'll be working on, as well as the behaviors. After that, you then would need to reach out to your supervisor if one, you still have not had your admin team meeting, or two, if let's say you were unable to receive the client info sheet or behavioral plan, it's very important for you to reach out to your supervisor. You'll be able to locate that information on your behavioral therapist client folder, and that's going to be located in your Google account. If you have any other questions, please ask your supervisor and they can direct you the right way. And then lastly, you're going into your first session. Next part is we're going to go into how to run a preference assessment. Before we go into how to run a preference assessment, first things first is what is a reinforcement? Why do we need to conduct a preference assessment? With a reinforcement, essentially what a reinforcement is, it's anything that occurs after a behavior that increases the future probability of a behavior. So think of it like this. If a child is using their words to communicate with you, instead of crying or engaging in problem behaviors, you want to reinforce that behavior because they're talking and they're using meaningful context and they're communicating effectively with you. An example of that would be the child says to you, I want a break. And as soon as you hear that word and those words and that behavior, you want to immediately reinforce that behavior because that reinforcement of using their words or communicating will increase the likelihood of them communicating in the future again. If the target is something that the client can do, but needs to do more often, you want to make sure that you're completely reinforcing the correct response. An example of that would be if the child has the ability and in their repertoire to use 5, 7-word sentences, but the child is only using 1-word sentence for today. You don't want to reinforce that behavior. You want to wait until the child uses 5 to 7 words before reinforcing. So just some things to look at when you're reinforcing a certain behavior. You want to think about what is within the child's developmental level, as well as what exactly or what behaviors you're going to be reinforcing. Reinforcers. So in order to conduct a preference assessment, what we're essentially looking for are what are reinforcers? What are things that are motivating for the individual? So as I mentioned in previous parts of the PowerPoint, we talked about items, things, even edibles that are reinforcing for the individual. Those are what you want to assess when you're running a preference assessment. And it's very key to conduct preference assessments because the preference are going to help you figure out the reinforcers. And this is essentially what's motivating the individual. One, a reinforcer is any item or activity that is considered a reward for the client. So if you assume on Monday that the child really wants swings, and then Tuesday you conduct a preference assessment and the child is not interested in the swing, the swing is no longer a reinforcer. So a reinforcer is only reinforcing, and a reinforcer if the child is in fact motivated. Reinforcers also vary from client to client and day by day. So that's why it's essential to run it throughout session, not just in the beginning, but throughout. A key here at AIFC is to run a preference assessment in between transitioning from one activity to the next or transitioning from one goal or target goal. Another thing is to be mindful of your demeanor towards the learners. You want to maintain a positive attention. Be mindful of your voice, your body language. You want to make sure that you are expressing in a positive, reinforcing tone, especially if they are in fact, demonstrating these behaviors that you want to reinforce. All right, so now we're going to go into what is a preference assessment. Preference assessment is a way we can learn what exactly is reinforcing to our clients. This can be done simply by asking them questions like, what would you like to play with today? What do you want to work for today? If the child is nonverbal, a good way to conduct a preference assessment is simply providing them the freedom to engage in certain activities around the environment. So this could be providing a few toys within their area and seeing what they gravitate towards. You can even time how long the individual is engaging with each item. That can give you some type of assessment of what exactly is reinforcing or if it's even reinforcing to begin with. This next slide here is a visual of what is a preference assessment. I'll go into a little bit of it, but essentially what you want to look at is the first left box and the far right box. So the first left box is just ask the individual or the learner, what do they want to play with? Like as mentioned, you can bring them a few items towards them and present to them. And if the child gravitates towards one, then you know that this reinforcer is more reinforcing than the other. Another thing is what we mentioned is providing a few items in front of them and timing how long they are engaging with each item. The longer they engage with it, the more reinforcing. Now we're going to go into the far right, which is observe the individual. So basically, you want to run a bunch of naturalistic opportunities to see what the child gravitates towards. Sometimes the learner will just tell you, I want to go outside, or I want to play with a peer. So those are essentially what a preference assessment is. You're using those as a reinforcer. Once you conduct the preference assessment and you know exactly what is motivating for the child, you can then use that for learning. And that's going to be the next part. So before we move on, let's take a quick quiz.